Hi, and welcome to Designed for Life, the podcast that brings design and technology teachers and business leaders from across the UK together as we collectively seek to inspire, energize, and create the workforce of the future.
Hi, and welcome to Designed for Life, the podcast brought to you by the Design and Technology Association. Just a few notes before we go on to the latest episode, which I'm really excited to bring to you. Firstly, as I have said previously, our intention is to bring these podcasts to you more frequently. We're trying to do 2 a month now. We started off with 1 a month, and demand is screaming, can we have a little bit more? So yeah, we're going to expand out and do 2 a month. I'm very, very keen to talk to some design and technology teachers, both at primary school level and at secondary school level. So if you lead the subject at primary, please get in touch with us. The best way to do that is probably via email, and it's designedforlife@data.org.uk. At secondary level, keen to talk to anybody really about COVID and how you've coped with COVID, how you've coped with the disruption that it has caused, or if you're doing something exciting in your department that you think probably has got wider application and people should know about, people should hear about, then please, again, designedforlife@data.org.uk. Please get in contact and let's get you on the list. We've got quite a long list of people queued up to come onto the podcast, people from business, from industry, from education, from all aspects that cover our subject. But I'm keen to add to that list. So if you think that, yeah, I could do that, I could be one of those people, please contact us and do it today. Don't wait till tomorrow, because tomorrow something else will get in the way and it won't happen. While you think of it, pick that phone up, email us now. This podcast is brought to you, as all of them, with our partners from the Edge Foundation. And just really a quick shout out, a quick thank you, which I do on every podcast, because without the Edge Foundation, this podcast wouldn't be here. It's that simple. So huge thank you to the Edge for their continued support of this venture. And so to today's episode. And today's episode's guest has been working in sustainability with textiles and looking at different materials to use and different ways to use textiles for a number of years. Has been working both as a practicing designer, but also has been lecturing and is a professor in the field, and a well-known professor in the field. So I'm delighted to be able to bring this to you today. And so we'll move to the next episode straight away. Hi, and we're with Professor Rebecca Earley today. Rebecca is a design researcher and award-winning research team leader at University of Arts London. She's based at Chelsea College of Arts, where she's co-director of Centre for Circular Design, which we'll talk about later on. Becky's run her own studio since 1995, and her prints and garments are collected by museums across the globe, including MFIT in New York, RASD Museum, as well as the V&A Crafts Council in London, and Pitt Rivers Museum, one that I've never been to but is now on my list in Oxford. Hi, Becky.
Hi there, Tony.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I do loads of research before we come into these things, and I was scouting around the internet over the Christmas, and I just got more and more excited about doing this, because what you're doing, I'm so passionate about myself. So this should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, well, me too. It's great to have an opportunity to reflect on all the things we've been doing, and really nice to reach new audiences with the research. So thanks.
Fantastic. So really, just as by way of a little bit of an introduction, I mean, I'm going to dig into your background a little bit, as we do with all of our guests, and look at, where you went to school and what sort of formed and shaped you as a designer as you came through. But just by way of a little bit of introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and what your passions are.
Well, I'm a textile designer by training, working in the field of fashion for well over 25 years now. And I'm just really passionate about creativity and change, and the way in which, in a way, we've created design as a field of practice to sort of serve what's now really an outdated industrial structure. Now we have climate change and we have all kinds of resource pressures lying ahead. I'm really interested in how we can use design to take on some of these wicked challenges.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we'll get into it later on, but what we're finding is that's what motivates students as well in our subject, is that they are very aware of how messed up the world is, thanks to a generation above them or a generation, 2 generations above them, and they want to fix it and they want to talk about it. So yeah, that's something we'll get into. With all our guests, we go right the way back and go back to school. I mean, what was school like for you?
Yeah, school was great, actually. I have fond memories, really, of what I was up to at school. I lived in a village in Wiltshire, grew up very much in the countryside, very much amusing myself with the outdoors world and the things my dad was doing as a builder and chopping wood and fishing, and really quite Tom Sawyer, actually, if I look back at it. And went to the local village school and then on to the local comprehensive. And, I really loved learning, I think. If I think back to sort of my time in the art and the sort of workshops back then, it's really a nice time when we were sort of crafting and making and learning to draw. But I actually changed school when I was 14 and I went away to boarding school then. And they didn't have design then. It was all about art. And so I spent a good few years in this lovely little art studio just drawing and painting and drawing and painting. And really enjoying living away from home at that age with lots of new friends and a very exciting environment. Yeah, my school years were really great, actually. Very creative and lots of things to count my blessings for, I think.
It sounds like that secondary school experience is where the creativity really blossomed.
I think so. I think we were sort of looking at the world as young adults and sort of bringing it into our own, day-to-day lives. I mean, I do think that growing up in a village and not a city means that you have to occupy yourself. And that boredom is actually really important to becoming a creative person later on. You've got to suss things out for yourself and amuse yourself. I was listening to one of your previous podcasts with Jude Pullen, and he was saying the same thing. Actually, if your parents are really busy, as mine were in the sort of 70s and 80s, really making a go of it for our family, then you're left to your own devices and you learn to find things to do, to make things to do, to sort of experiment and to test things out. And I think it builds your fear factor. You become braver, I think, if you're left to your own devices earlier on.
I was going to refer to Jude because Jude has said, basically there was no good looking at his parents saying, entertain me. They were too busy. And it was like, get on with it, entertain yourself. Within reason, there was like climb a tree, but don't go too high. But do those things and but don't look at us. We're busy.
Yeah, he actually said 3 counts and you're out, as in you could do this. After that is up to you. And that was really great because that's exactly sort of how it was with me. I mean, gosh, my parents were very much there and present and coming up with lots of opportunities. But yeah, their response was, well, just go and do it. So I'm really conscious now as a parent that we make sure those opportunities are there, but that we don't spoon feed or helicopter, because I don't want my kids tapping me on the shoulder every 5 minutes saying, what can I do now? And that's why this period of time of lockdown has been super interesting to see what kind of small people we've made. You've got to keep them off being on the screen too much of the time. They can't go out and run wild and meet up with their friends and experiment in the way that we might have done. So we have to be more resourceful at home, either on our own or together. And that's been fascinating, actually.
My daughter dances her thing, and she's learned how to dance on Zoom and choreograph on Zoom. It's been amazing watching it, because when she first did, she said, I can't do this. There's no way. But they found a way. So you moved on and you studied textiles design at Loughborough and then moved to Central St. Martin's to do fashion print design. 2 amazing places to study. I mean, if you're going to study design, they're not bad places to go. So how did that form you? How did that shape you, those experiences at university?
It's funny, isn't it? When you're a young person, your social life, your friends and your environment is sort of almost the most important thing. So if I think back to those times, the things that are sort of strongest in my memory are, what I was getting up to alongside this education I was getting. So I actually had to stop and think about, well, what was I learning? And how has it gone forward? And of course, it's all there. There are these design cornerstones there that BA textile program at Loughborough gave me, very much about learning about colour and about pattern and layout and composition and the sort of techniques of textiles printing and different fiber types. But actually, it's quite funny to think back to like even foundation course. I didn't know what textile design was. I went there having sort of drawn and painted, and it was only when I sort of turned 18, 19 that I understood that there was this field out there for textiles and fashion. And, you know, my school hadn't taught it. It was straight art. So I explored things in this foundation course environment, and I had this literally this one day when the tutor was walking around the desks talking to each person saying, so, you know, what's your specialism going to be? And I remember sort of watching them getting closer and closer to my desk. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is like the rest of my life. And I have no idea. And why are they asking me? And I sort of started to talk about the idea of graphic design and what my parents used to call commercial design. But when the tutor arrived at my desk, my friend, who was wearing a gorgeous dress and, you know, her hair up in a big ribbon, said textiles. And so I thought, oh, I'll do what Claire's doing. And it was just this random moment. I often think of this because I didn't really know what it was, but something about it resonated and felt right. And then I started to look into these courses and think, yeah, actually, this decorative element, the sort of tactility of materials and the relationship to clothing and sort of social life all felt much more right, I think, than graphic design did.
There's a danger you can overthink it, do you think? I mean, you know, having to make that decision there that you described, this lecturer walking along a line and it's like, God, what am I going to do? You can overthink it, and it's just going with your passion and going with what excites you and what and the way you described your friend's dress. It was obviously something that was there in you anyway.
Yeah, very much so. I sort of gave my inaugural lecture last year and I talked about my mum knitting and my gran sewing and everything being mended around the house. And actually textiles had been very much a part of my life until then, but it wasn't something that we really thought of as a career. You know, it wasn't in our world. So it did seem like a random moment, but I also think if I had gone to do graphic design, I kind of would have ended up here as well, but just using a different set of tools. Because I think the theme that came out of looking at my design education and my design career trajectory was that I've always been motivated by social issues, politics, kind of the culture around me. So the design discipline and the techniques I've used have always been my sort of the means to my end.
Yeah, let's stick with textiles just for a minute. As a design and technology teacher, I've sort of always, as a head of department, we used to teach everything at Key Stage 3. And I felt that was really important, that we weren't seen as, that's the guy that works with wood, that's the woman that works with metal, and the sexual stereotypes that drop out of that as well, that, you know, the textiles teacher was almost definitely a woman. And we moved around that. And it made a big difference to the way, it was a girls' school as well. So it made a very big difference to the way that the students perceived us as designers or teachers, as it were. What is it about textiles that really, really excited you back then and excites you now as a material?
There's something in textiles which is accessible to us all. It's expressive. You know, it's turning something functional into something really creative and enjoyable. It connects people and you can do a lot with it yourself, hands-on. So it's a core part of all of our lives, whether we consciously connect to it or not. That was there, I think, in my degree at Loughborough. Some of that pleasure, if I look back at my sketchbooks, my work was always really bright and humorous. But it was really when I did my master's at Central St Martin's that I started to really connect a real set of sort of ideologies and ideas with design and textiles. So we would be set a brief, maybe, you know, it's quite open, it's one word, but I found myself being affected by London and by being based in the middle of Soho and by the new friends and groups I was sort of hanging out with and bringing those sort of youthful motivations right into the work. One week I was really exploring feminism. The next it would be, you know, environment and Catherine Hamnett. And, you know, I was in a place where I was allowed to do that. And I was trying to make this connection to textiles. And I couldn't understand why everything was floral. You know, who would want flowers all the time? I mean, now, as it happens, I'm quite happy to have flowers all the time. But, you know, back then it seemed completely irrelevant and quite sexist. So I was sort of learning about textiles. I was learning about textiles for fashion. And I was sort of learning about how to connect ideologies into the design process. And there's so much you can do with textiles to explore that.
Absolutely. So you left Central St. Martin's and you set up your own studio, Be Earley, 1995, and hand painting textile designs. You had a little bit of help by the looks of things. There was Craft Council. There were a few other people involved in helping you. But that's a brave decision. It's a decision a lot of designers make, because I don't want to work for somebody else. I want to work for myself. What was driving that at the time?
It didn't feel that brave. It sort of felt like the only thing I could possibly do. A few things have been going on, I suppose. My friendship groups were all artists, so boyfriends, housemates. And the art world at that time was a really exciting place. It was the early 90s. So it was the real birth of the YBA art movement. And as a party girl, I loved a free party. So I was going out to private views where you could get a free beer. But I was seeing a lot of artwork, and I was understanding a lot about the world of the artist. And so I think subconsciously that had become part of my understanding of what things might be or what trajectory might be like. So I hadn't thought of creating an industry focused portfolio. I had thought of self-expression as what I was there to do. So it was a recession in the early 90s, and we were sort of told that, it would be challenging as a job market. But it was really the late Professor Louise Wilson, who was the course director, who said to me, as a textile designer, don't go out there and sell your work to a fashion brand. Try to put your own name on your work. And she was giving that advice to all the textile students on her fashion course, which was really ahead of its time, because she was so right. What I hadn't realized and what I've been searching for was some of my sort of reading around feminism, was trying to understand textiles for being this female pursuit, hidden within the supply chain, having the credit for their work assigned to the fashion designer. And she was encouraging us to try to find ways to put our own stamp on our creative contribution. So few things happened. I had a friend working at Karl Lagerfeld in Paris, and I got a letter on Karl Lagerfeld heavy paper saying, come to Paris, bring a portfolio, I'm sure we can work with you, type thing. And I didn't, which was crazy.
You didn't go?
No, I didn't go. Because at the same time, I had sort of become friends with lots of stylists and photographers, and my clothes had gone into a shop window in a big store, and I had front covers of magazines, and I was styling the pop stars of the day, like Bjork and Kylie Minogue. Well, actually, I was giving my clothes to the stylists who were working with them. So for me to go over and sell my work and have it on Carl's catwalk seemed to be against the advice that Louise had given me. So very naively, I was like, oh no, I'm doing something else right now. I don't think my friend could quite believe it, but it was good advice. I probably needed to have a bit more awareness about the financial picture. But ironically, it didn't even matter putting my name on my work. I was small as a label. The big labels still came along and copied. And there were several moments where I could see my work had been reinterpreted or directly taken. And you're still put in a position of being sort of voiceless in the fashion industry, whether you try to fight against that or not.
And there's very little you can do about that. I mean, we spoke to Diz McDonald. She was in the same position. People were just stealing her work and mimicking it, copying it. And there wasn't an awful lot that you can do about that, really. You can't protect yourself other than making it as difficult as possible for others to do it.
And again, Louise Wilson gave me some brilliant advice. She said, it's a really big compliment, and don't let it make you angry. Use it to keep you, open and keep having ideas. Your best comeback is not to go into a legal situation, but to adopt a mindset of like, I'm the one with the ideas. I'll keep having the ideas. People will notice.
And it means you're doing something right. If somebody's copying, it means you're doing something right.
Yeah.
You had success. I mean, your studio was successful. You were working with people all over the world by the looks of things.
I suppose the sort of greatest commercial success for me was around the scarf collection, where from the late 90s, I was finding recycled PET fleece, so made from plastic bottles, and hand printing found objects onto these products. And then I had about 25 stores worldwide I was stocking, and an agent in Shoreditch that would just basically take a little sample collection and then take orders on it and fax them through to me. And it was very, very busy, but all of it hand printed. It was pre-digital printing, so it was quite labor intensive. And I kept that going for as long as I could. But another opportunity started to emerge. I started to get involved in academic research and research projects. at Chelsea College of Arts. And that really became something that I wanted to do with a passion then.
I was going to say, I mean, the teaching side came in very soon after, and you've sort of alluded already to that was in you anyway. That was a part of your motivation as a designer, was to make a change and make a difference.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it at all, but as soon as I graduated and my work got some press coverage, I was invited to teach Glasgow, Ravensbourne, University of Westminster. I was sort of taking trains all over the place, but I also got invited in to teach in Chelsea. And as soon as I arrived in this amazing building in Lime Grove in Shepherd's Bush, it felt like home. It was this team led by an amazing professor. There's something about it that just felt right. And it felt like a relief not to be on a train all over the place, but to actually have a sort of a home for teaching and learning that I could go to.
Well, you were there from 1996 to 2017, so it obviously fitted.
Yeah, well, I'm still there. I'm still at Chelsea,
No.
but we've moved now. We moved 10 years ago to Millbank next to the Tate Britain, which is a wonderful campus. And it brought together the Chelsea campuses that had been split up. So fine art and interior design and textiles had all been on different sites. So we created a new art school, really, in 2010.
So you were working with Textiles Environment Design, or TED for short, in Chelsea. Can you tell us a little bit about TED? Because I've looked at some of the stuff that's come off, the spin-offs from it, and there's some exciting things have spun out of that work. Can you just tell us a little bit about it?
It was really visionary. I think that Professor Kay Politovich wanted her teaching team to understand more about the environmental impacts in textile design. And it was an early stage in the design research culture in the UK. Mid-90s, there weren't that many PhDs out there at that point. Funding bodies were just sort of emerging. So she was really ahead of the curve in bringing these questions to us. And it was driven by this report that had come out in the early 90s. Well, a couple of reports, one of them about just how damaging the textile industry was. We really didn't know a lot of those impact statistics before the 90s. Catherine Hamnett had been looking at organic cotton, and labour issues and sweatshop issues had emerged. But the overarching impacts from growing, making, dyeing, printing, finishing, shipping, laundry, none of those impacts were in our design education. Another report said that the decisions that a designer will make at the beginning of this whole process make 80 to 90% of the product's impact. It was a groundbreaking moment for us then in the mid-90s to go, well, we don't know what those decisions are. If we're making such impactful decisions, like, where are they? How can we acknowledge them and make different decisions? Over time, it sort of transpired that, in big companies, textile and fashion designers are probably making more like 50% of the impacts through their decisions. But even so, we still have to understand the chain of events that we set in motion.
That's still a massive responsibility, whether it's 50 or 70%. As a designer, that's a massive responsibility that drops on your shoulders.
Yeah, and the challenge has been to understand those decisions, to examine them, to find alternatives, and then to test those out, and to make all of that more exciting and innovative than a traditional textile education. So at the end of the day, and I think this will become a real theme with this interview with you, Tony, pleasure, enjoyment, creativity, we have to sort of challenge the status quo and make change through approaches that bring joy and bring a viable, sort of exciting alternative to the way that people are choosing to do things now. So we had to marry up environmental concerns with creative challenges really early on. And that was a great brief for me. It was a perfect fit, I think, for me as a researcher.
You were good enough to send me a lecture through over the Christmas break to have a look at, which you were doing with UAL students. I've watched it twice now. And you mentioned in there that the UK is the worst offender in Europe when it comes to fast fashion and textiles waste. The UK has got a reputation worldwide of being very fashion conscious. Is it that need for fast fashion to change identity regularly that feeds this and makes us so wasteful?
Yeah, I think those statistics were from a BBC report, and it specifically looked at the rates of consumption of fast fashion labels. So the volumes that have been sold per capita. And we are the worst offenders in Europe. We do love our fashion, and I think it's because we love our music and we have a very evolved culture for young people. I would say it's one thing almost, which is punk. You know, we invented to some extent youth and youthful expression through clothing. You can see it everywhere in terms of how we identify to our tribe through our clothes. So now we have social media that's even more heightened. And I think we also have more and faster stuff here than in other places as well. So if you're a young person in London or in any other city, you can pretty much get stuff the same day or the next day from online shops. And of course, you've got a short journey to a high street that is absolutely crammed full of options. But the biggest contribution is going to be social media and online shopping to those statistics.
Which is dangerous. I mean, another thing that you said in the lecture is that, you know, if you look at your own wardrobe, probably 70% of it you only wear 1 to 3 times a year. And the other 30% is something that comes out regularly. I went and looked at my wardrobe last night after looking at that, and I'm sad to say that you're dead right. Especially since March now with the lockdown. I've got 15 suits that sit up there and I haven't put one on since March. But who needs 15 suits? Why have I got 15 suits? It's just, and yet this morning I opened my inbox on my personal email and everybody's trying to sell me something. Everybody's trying to push it at me. And it's very easy to click. And as you say, in 24 hours, it arrives at your front door.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lockdown has changed the parameters of our need for clothes, because I could have pajamas on now. I'm talking to you over Zoom. You don't know. We need less and we need slightly different. So the sales of pajamas and comfy clothes for homes have gone up. Men tend to be better than women in terms of how much they wear because they don't tend to buy quite so much to express themselves and to express change. And maybe because of pregnancy, they don't have quite such extreme body size issues as well, which would lead to more consumption. But clothes aren't about needs in terms of what do I need? Why do I need this suit? I only need one. They're about emotional needs, which we still just don't understand enough about. And of course, people are buying stuff not because they're cold, so much as they want to look new, they want to look right, they want to connect with that tribe, they want to connect with that pop star, they want to feel more professional suddenly. Maybe they buy clothes to change themselves, to help them change and progress. So it's incredibly emotive, the way that we dress ourselves. So of course we have a surfeit. We also have a surfeit because clothing has become cheap, too cheap. And so we can give ourselves that choice. I think people are sort of looking at that to find out where the evidence is around benefit. Does it benefit us to have that much choice, or is it actually more beneficial to us to restrict it or to sort of make more of less?
We run a course on sustainability, which we did with Practical Action. I don't know if you've heard of Practical Action. And we have teachers come in there and we've had teachers say, well, actually, if you look at the syllabus, sustainability is only a small part of the GCSE syllabus. But once you do the course, you see it actually touches every part of the syllabus. And teachers come in thinking, I'm not quite sure why I'm here. And I've actually had teachers walking out the door saying, I'm never going to teach the same again. And, that's how powerful it can be. Where does the responsibility lie for that change? I mean, it's probably across a number of people, but is it with us as consumers? Is it the brands that need to change what they're pushing at us? Is it the manufacturing of it that needs to change? Or is it the designer? We've already said the designer's got huge influence. It's across all of those, undoubtedly, but where does the emphasis lie?
It's hard for me to answer that because the emphasis for me is through design, because that's my expertise and that's what I've been focusing on. But you're quite right. The answer is we need solutions to come from all of those areas. The real key is getting them all to work together. So there is a whole new field of practice, a new expert that's needed, which is the bridger. Because what happens with trying to find solutions to this industry is that you have a push and pull between factions, which can activate one group in society, but can completely turn off another group in society. And then, of course, you have your policymakers who are probably the most powerful in terms of actually implementing change that has a legal binding element to it. But you're not going to get your young students necessarily having an influence or much of an input there. So it's about this perfect landscape, this portfolio of solutions, and it's about bringing them together and getting them to all support each other and to understand that everybody's looking for the same kind of change. So for brands, I think brands have a very powerful position. A brand has to change from the CEO outwards. If you don't get the support at the top, no matter how many sustainable product lines the designers are trying to push through, you have an infrastructure and a hierarchy that won't bring about the scale of change that's actually needed. So brands can be huge forces for good once you get a shift in the whole culture, in that whole corporate culture. And they also have a huge influence with the manufacturers as well. So many brands don't own their own factories, but they work with a network, a supply chain of manufacturers. And the manufacturers are where the technology and the material impacts can be addressed. So actually, by bringing in new measures, restrictions within manufacturers, you can reduce a lot of the waste and toxicity. But they will only change really when the brands make them change or insist that they change or demand that they change. So there's an interaction between those two and then outwards from there. Consumers, my position on consumers is, I probably annoy people because I'm too soft in this respect, but I want to be the carrot and not the stick. I do something very naughty as a researcher, and I look at myself and I look at my own habits and I look at my own behaviours and I look at my own kids and I say, what's actually going on? What does this mean? And therefore, how likely is something to work? And there's an undeniable sense of pleasure in buying something and having something new. The kids, no matter how enlightened they are and how much they love David Attenborough, the next day they will want a second, third, fourth pair of trainers. It's a part of being an aspirational, emerging part of culture, society, that you acquire things and that you use them and you grow and change and you connect. So we've got to find different ways to offer consumers those pleasures and those gains. What we need to encourage consumers not to think about is the cheap, fast stuff that's highly toxic that they actually don't need. There is some work to be done on educating and guiding consumers. And that's where the collaboration with communication design is really, really, really important. But for me personally, as a textile design researcher, I have a limited influence over what consumers might do. And then designers, it's all about design for me. It's all about questioning the curriculum, questioning the practices, questioning the products, and evolving a different mindset with the next generation of designers. And I tend to work, as you've seen, on small projects in primary schools, mostly university level, but I spend a lot of time working with designers in companies as well, trying to shift and expand the mindsets of those designers and actually sort of activate them and bring them together.
You're listening to Designed for Life. This podcast has been made possible through the support of our friends at the Edge Foundation, helping all young people to achieve their potential.
I love that you work right away across the spectrum, really. And what came out with the lecture was the friction even within one company that's quite motivated to make change between the different disciplines within one company. I mean, that Italian design room that you showed, there wasn't a smiley face in that room. There were about 30 people in there and everybody looked like they needed a tooth extracting. It was difficult. So within one company that wants to make change, they obviously want to make change because they're there with you talking about it. They wouldn't be there otherwise. But it's still difficult, isn't it?
It's such a human challenge. We've actually done a lot of the research technically to have a much, much better industry, without a doubt. We have. It's there. The materials have been developed, the recycling technology is pretty much there, but we don't have the drive for it and the speed to really enact it. So when you've got a company, what you're trying to do are bring the people together to collaborate on a shared vision. They're classic design thinking challenges in some respects, and it's team building as well. It's innovation management. Lots of different areas are coming together into the room in that moment. What we find is that it all comes down to the textile material that's on the table. If you brought in a sample box, maybe things they've never seen before, but they've heard about, and they start to touch and feel those and sort of share them, there's an excitement. So straight away, people are connecting around something. And then you unpack their challenges, their problems about making something like this. You tease it out of them, they're sharing, they're trusting each other, they're beginning to work together, and you map out the barriers to why this can't be done. Then you flip them into a space where you say, well, what are the opportunities for you all? You're all the most creative people, or you're a brilliant brand. How can you make different products? How can you do business differently and see it as a fantastic design challenge? And that's when it all comes together. The photograph you saw is the beginning of the process, and by the end, people are hugging and crying, and you get letters afterwards saying you've changed my life type thing. Mostly they want to go off and do PhDs and look at it even further, but connecting around the materials and envisioning that change together, it does cross boundaries and sort of siloed departments. So it doesn't solve everything. I'm just one designer and one team going into these situations, but I can definitely feel the potential to work that way.
I guess it's human nature that you go into something like that protecting your discipline. I'm a professional in this area and this is what I'm protecting. And that's the photograph there is everybody's in there and they're all very territorial. They're looking after their bit. And then it's breaking that down. I love the idea of, let's get back to what drew you into working with textiles in the first place. Let's get a sample box out and start going back to basics. And then they open up a little bit and then you go, I'd love to see the end of that as well. I'd love to see the faces at the end of that. You work with primary as well, and I've found it very interesting that you've done some work with primary school students. Our experience is that primary age kids know no boundaries. They haven't been shackled yet, and as a result of that, their creativity is just wild if allowed to be unboxed. Is that what you found with your work with them?
I went into a local primary school over 5 years. Of course, I went there because my kids went there, and there was no art room and they didn't have the funds for an art teacher. And I was horrified, let alone design. I couldn't believe that we had arrived at this moment. So there was a space that needed reinventing into an art room. And so I literally went in at the weekends and did it myself. And then with a team of other mums, we found an amazing woman who would run after school clubs. And then we just built little projects, really, to sort of tease and to sort of ignite. And, it comes down to the staff wanting to do this in addition to everything else they're being asked to do. If you're going to get the actual teachers to take it on. And they have this embedded art approach where art and creativity is part of the other subjects that they teach. So I was trying to give them techniques and ideas that could relate to geography or maths or which isn't necessarily the way I would want it to work. But I think it's like you said about sustainability, it's everywhere. So, why shouldn't it be explored in every subject? It wasn't a formal project. I was doing it in my own time. And I think that was the key to it being as rewarding and creative as it ended up being. I hadn't written a big project that I had funders looking at the work. I just wanted to go and make change. And that was very liberating for me as a researcher. I suppose what was really drawing me in there was that I was a professor of sustainable fashion and textiles, and yet my kids were nagging me for the latest T-shirt or tracksuit or trainer. And I was having to find a way to talk to them about where things came from, what those things cost the earth, the fact that they had an abundance of things already. And so that, how did I explain to kids that I didn't want to make this purchase for them? So it was about reframing it around the things that they do understand. The school uniform, the lost property department, the stuff they can see on the streets that are discarded, and then linking that to play. So we could explore this world of materials and clothing and literally the stuff that's in their drawers at home and what that meant to the world outside, not just them, but the world outside. So I had some parents being quite annoyed with me saying, well, they came home and they ran to their rooms and they opened their drawers and they were looking for labels saying made in India. And they were saying, Mummy, why is my vest made in India? So I became quite unpopular for a while with the parents. But, I just found a way to get them to see their clothes.
We do a little exercise there with a practical action course where we just throw some things on the table and then we try and look at the life cycle of that and look at the carbon footprint that item that quite often sells for a very small amount of money in a shop will have built before it gets to that shop. And that's what stuns people when you look at the movement and you look at the amount of carbon that's involved. The first time I did it, I was blown away with it completely. There's a concept within TED, is the TED 10, where there's 10 cards and each one plays against the other a little bit. Maybe I'm wrong, but it looks like if you concentrate on one card, you actually lose another one a little bit. Is that right?
Oh, you're very astute, actually. That's sort of second or third level card playing. But yeah, the 10 came out of what I was talking about earlier, where we were trying to find every single decision that a textile designer would need to make so that they were conscious of the impacts. We did that work over 10 years, and that 10 is the framing of all those decisions. So each card represents a range of decisions. And you can play them in lots of different ways. The straightforward way is to give a lecture or do a workshop on all 10. And in doing that, you've sort of let a designer know what lays ahead for them as thinking challenges. But then what you can do is put a product down and say, okay, let's redesign this product by, and then you play a card. And so as soon as you play, let's say, design for cyclability number 2, you might have a problem with 7, ethical production. You might find that in order to get this one recycled, you're going to have to, or you create more energy when you make a water-saving product. So they do play off each other because, of course, that's what happens in the real life cycle, and why life cycle assessment is such an important tool for designers, because what you expect to happen or what you want to happen isn't necessarily what does happen.
I think that's a great tool to bring into education with students. Did you use that with the primary kids at all?
No, I thought it was a bit too, I couldn't do design activism. Every project I do, in a way, I come back every couple of years and we revise as a team, we revise the edition. So we're working on a new edition at the moment, which is drawing across from the bioeconomy and biodesign, so that there's much more understanding around the decisions designers are making when they start to work with that group of regenerated materials.
Just before I move on, you mentioned the concept of play with fairly young children. I think this is something that we lose. Definitely in secondary education, we lose it. Everything becomes very serious. Does that concept of play, to me, it can lead to creativity. If you create an environment where people can go in and just play with colour, play with design, play with different ideas, does that unshackle creativity in your experience?
Without question, I would say, yeah. And it was the only way I could work with young children. And I hadn't realised that I'd actually been doing that with those designers in companies as well. I kind of related it afterwards. But in order to sort of work with such young children, I had to go in and get them to play with materials to enable them to find their own roots to their own creativity. Also, at the very same time, like in the same week, I would be in a workshop with scientists and policymakers. I hadn't really realised that what I was also doing with them was getting them to do forms of adult play in my sort of design thinking approaches and in the workshops I designed and in the tools I designed to unleash their more structured knowledge and creativity. So it needs guidance. You can't just sort of expect the two things to marry up. I think you can play unfettered, organic, really relaxing play. And then you can also have play that leads to creativity and insights, but some of that needs a guiding force.
There needs to be scaffolding around it. There needs to be an end goal from it that you're leading towards. With materials, I mean, polyester cotton is the demon in a way. I mean, it's become such an easy material to use, combination to use, and it's very damaging. And I've been lucky to see biotextiles and people playing with them and looking at what they do. And there was one that, I mean, it looked, it felt, it nearly smelt like leather, but it was grown in a tray and it was amazing. Is that the way forward? Is that where we have to move? Or at least part of the solution?
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. It's part. And I can't emphasize this enough, because whenever I talk to somebody in industry, they want a single solution and they want to know the solution for their part in the industry, of course, naturally. But when it comes to materials, what we're looking at as we look ahead is a whole portfolio. It's about how they work together, and it's about, more than we've ever managed before, understanding what material is best for what product. So what they call design for appropriateness. So yes, we can replace cotton and polyester. The first thing we can do with it is to only blend it and use it when we absolutely need to. The second thing we can do is we can recycle it using both mechanical and chemical processes. And the new chemical processes which are coming online, I mean, the UK has got a pilot factory already in this process. It breaks them down in liquid form and you extract the material molecules.
So you can separate the two.
You can do it. A company called Worn Again Technologies have been working on it for about 15 years. So we will be able to chemically recycle. That means that the polyester can go back into production and cotton can be regenerated into viscose, or if it's good quality, you can get to a lyocell. So you can deal with that, but you can also create alternatives. So what we're looking at the moment are ways to make replacements of cotton and ways to make more bio-based, so not crude oil-based, but bio-based polyesters. And there's a lot of work going on in it's almost like a space race of textiles in who will make the most viable new fibre. And there are lots. I mean, there are at least 7 different ways you can recycle cotton into a new fibre chemically. So, every country has got its own race going. But I think people are really concerned about volume. I think people are sort of saying, it's all very well having these solutions, but unless we reduce the volume and the speed of consumption,
one goes to the other. Yeah. That leather substitute that I talked about, it was an incredible material, but it had taken 8 months to get it to that stage. It was slow. It was very, very slow in its creation.
I think that's the other thing about the biotextile field, the biomaterial field, is that will all speed up. There are ways that we can create from renewable resources like food waste. At the moment, we're working with agricultural waste, straw, cow manure and seaweed. These processes will get faster and they'll get more viable. But we need to be feeding them all into an industry that has a different structure to it, because the linear, rapid, highly optimized fast fashion brand is not the future for us.
I was in a secondary school and the students were talking about Stacey Dooley and a documentary that she'd done on television, which had changed them. They'd looked at it and they thought, I'm not going to go into a certain supermarket anytime soon, having seen that documentary. And I don't want to buy something that has got that background to it. I don't want to be involved with that. And this is 15-year-old students saying this out loud. Do you think that we're at a turning point where people's habits of buying are ready to change?
You would hope so after this horrendous pandemic. I mean, you would hope we've really had time to look more closely at what's going on and how we can play a role in that through our decision making and maybe through our career paths. We have to be conscious of volumes elsewhere. I think that we can have a more conscious consumer in the UK and around Europe. Let's not fool ourselves that we still have an enormous challenge. So I think those kinds of questions, and especially that are driven by insightful media, are really important to our kids. But if they don't have the choice of where to make those purchases from, then they move their pound from one place to another place and actually unknowingly probably trigger another range of impacts. So it's just a bit more complicated than those programs present. Of course it is. I think it's really important that consumers start to ask questions. But I'll bring it back to design. I think the most exciting thing that generation have got, if you're 15, is to look at design and engineering and the creative fields for what change it can bring the world, given the climate and the human crisis that's out there. I keep talking about climate to people and they say, well, what about people though? My God, how people are treating each other, and decolonization and Black Lives Matter. I mean, my God, we've got so much work to do to just sort of be equitable and decent to each other, let alone destroying our environment. So it's all about embracing the opportunities that those challenges present and not letting them overwhelm us, flipping it into a creative path and not one which takes us to the sofa to hide under a blanket.
Somebody asked me online, because they were putting a piece together about design and technology, and they said, what is so exciting about your subject? And I just said, look, we're not about things. Yes, we are. We are about things, but we're more about people. It's more about connecting and communicating and changing and evolving. And actually, that's what kids want to do, in my experience. They want to connect. And my son's 26 yesterday, and he's still trying to find his right career. And he said, Dad, I don't really care about the money anymore. I just want to come home at the end of the day and I want to feel like I've made a difference. And that is where I find a lot of students are at the moment. Yes, they want to be well paid. They want to pay the bills. They don't want to worry about that. But they're more motivated by making a difference and doing something constructive, which I think is very positive for the world. You know, when you meet kids like that this is what motivates them.
Great story. And I can see it in my kids. I just want them to have the opportunities in the education system as they move forward to be ready for that and to explore that. And I find with my own discipline, I'm a little frustrated at its slowness and its reluctance to let go of outdated models, I suppose. Like, whilst I'm a researcher looking ahead at the field of design and using my knowledge of textiles as a lens to look ahead, I'm seeing a very, very different world, an incredibly different set of industries out there. And then on another day, I'll come back and teach on different courses. And the courses are brilliant, so don't get me wrong. But there are elements missing about taking that energy from young people and giving them the agency, the confidence, the skills to actually enact change on their own terms. Because quite often, if they go into a design company or a brand to work, it's a loss, really, to me, having spent 4 or 6 years in education with some of these young people. They could be doing more. And I think we've got to work harder at creating those opportunities for them and giving them the confidence to step into those new roles, which is where we started talking about entrepreneurialism and young people going out there and having the opportunity to sort of make things for themselves, and the internet and how that's changed things for people. At the end of the day, we're all going to have to do what we can whilst keeping a roof over our heads as well.
Yeah, that comes into it. I mean, there's a big discussion at the moment, which has been there for years, but I think is really relevant at the minute. You know, our subject is struggling. It's not the government's flavour of the day at the moment. None of the creatives are, to be honest. And just the pure name of it is something that we're debating. You know, is design and technology, does it make you look backwards or look forwards, that name? And I think it makes us look back. That word technology, I'm not sure that needs to be there anymore. Design, definitely. But design and innovation would work better for me. Design and entrepreneurism, I love that. So maybe it's time that we stop and we look back and we refocus the subject. That's a whole different podcast. One of the things that you're very keen on, I love this term of conscious consumers. If I'm a parent listening to this now, or a student listening to this now, perhaps, what can I do to become a conscious consumer? How can I change myself?
I think you've got to see every product as a system. Yes, I want that yellow tank top. I want it. And you've got to, first of all, think about the emotional system that's kicking in there in your brain and go, okay, well, why do I want it? And examine yourself a little bit. Take a moment, take a breath before you press purchase to think about that. Because quite often you'll find that it's a passing feeling. And just by staying with it, you can work out whether you really, really do want to make that purchase or not. And then you've got to look at the system behind that product. So the brand, what can you find out about its environmental credentials? Is it a brand you want to give your money to? In other words, invest in. If you see yourself as an investor of positive change, then there are definitely some brands that will serve you well. And there are more and more websites out there now where you can find those kinds of brands that have made a huge effort to make products more viable for the people and for the planet. So systems, it's textiles and design and sustainability. Those 3 words, they're all sort of systems. And I think, especially if you're going to go into this as a career move, understand them a little bit more. I wish when I had been at college, I had been taught about seeing things as systems and systems design and the textile industry as a set of interconnected people and places that work together, so that I could understand my place in it, and then I could understand a little bit more my influence and just understand that I had more agency. You know, if I had understood that 10 years earlier, I think my work would be much further ahead. I mean, for me as a parent, my big tip is about making it fun with my kids. So I would never get annoyed with them for wanting to buy something from a fast fashion brand, because I understand where the desire comes from. But I just found a whole set of ways to unpick it a bit with them. So definitely money. Like, okay, you've only got a certain amount of money, this is your savings. So first of all, is that a hit you want to take financially for them, their pocket money? But then I also have led by example, and I will style from my own wardrobe. That's really important to sort of, like you did, Tony, go and look at your own wardrobe and get the stuff out that you're no longer wearing. And then my kids will see me put things into stuff to give to my students, stuff to give to my friends, stuff to give to the charity shop. And they'll chat to me as I'm doing that. And I'm sort of showing them where things go and why I'm making that flow forward of things that we've grown out of. Also direct them towards the films and the TV and the media that have got positive messages. I mean, I'm married to an actor. We watch a lot of films, and films are shaping their worldview, especially now during the pandemic. So if you do a bit of research and then you sit down saying, oh, guys, there's something I want you to watch, and you sit together and you talk about it, it's a fantastic way to educate young people. So you're taking a little bit of a leading by example, but in a gentle way and with as much fun as possible.
I'm with you on that. I don't think the stick works. I think the carrot works much better. And I do it with my own kids. And I think in schools as well, if we can lead students to talk about stuff, they'll make their own decisions, and they generally make the right decisions. Finally, if there was one bit of advice, if there's students out there, and we're getting an increasing number of students that are listening to these pods, which is brilliant, who are thinking, well, absolutely, this motivates me. I want to work in this area. I want to do this. What one bit of advice would you give to a student that's thinking, textiles design, sustainability, all of this stuff, I want to work in that area? What would you advise them?
I think the answer to this is something you said earlier, and which comes out through TED's 10. It's look for the sustainable question or dimension in everything you're doing. From now on, it's all there in front of you. The meal that you're eating, the clothes that you're wearing, the design project that you've been set. Environmental impacts are coming from everything. Start to sort of see the world through that and understand it through impacts, both negative and positive. And you'll build up areas that really interest you then. So you sort of selectively, out of the whole TED's 10, which of course I recommend people download. I can give you the web details in a second. You can get a free pack as a PDF, or you can order a pack from us. Take those design cards, those questions with you everywhere you go, because even if a project doesn't look like it's about sustainability, there is an angle there, without doubt. And I think the big thing for us at UAL is to look at everything through the lens of decarbonisation and decolonisation. So it's about planet and it's about people. And I can guarantee you it's there, and it will bring a new angle to your every challenge.
Fantastic. That TED 10 and one or two other bits that I found while I was looking up for this pod, I'll put them in the podcast notes so people can pick them up and go from there. Becky, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed the last hour. It's been brilliant, and thank you for giving up the time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much, Tony, for giving me the opportunity to travel back in time and outside of our little lockdown boxes, and to just have an opportunity really to get excited and hopefully excite other people about what design can do and what needs to change.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Becky has got such a mountain of knowledge in the field and is so passionate about what she does. And it was fantastic that she could find time in what is undoubtedly a very, very busy schedule in order to talk to us. We'll put some notes in the pod notes alongside this, a couple of references and other bits and pieces that are sprung from the podcast, as we always do. So thank you to Becky for finding time to talk to us on that. Just a few notes for me. If you like that, please take a moment. It's really, really, we're not getting enough, if I'm really honest. Reviews open this up to other listeners and help us to go up the rankings, which means that people see us. And if people see us, then they might give it a listen. If they give it a listen, there's a chance they may stay. And our objective here really is to hit as many educators and hit as many business leaders as possible and try and join those two up in some way. So if you do enjoy the podcast, if you're liking listening to them, please just take a minute, wherever you've downloaded it, go on there, and just 2-3 minutes is all it takes. Please give us a quick review, rate us, and just a couple of lines just about, what it is about the podcast that brings you back. It will make a difference to us. Finally, just again, a huge thank you to the Edge Foundation and a huge thank you to all of you. Our numbers are going up. We are getting a wider listenership, and that makes this worth doing. So thank you so much. And until the next time, please take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you did, hit the subscribe button now, as we have guests lined up for future pods that will inform, inspire, and entertain. This podcast is brought to you by the Design and Technology Association.